I've said it once, but I'll probably say it a few more times throughout the day. It's so good to be home. And by home, I mean with you guys, with our family. We really look forward to being back here. And it's just a blessing to be with each other once again. If you have your Bibles, turn to Genesis chapter 1. That's where we'll be taking our text, Genesis chapter 1. While we were on our trip, we got to see my parents, of course, but we also got to visit with my grandparents. And so Shannon, Quali, and Tristan's great-grandparents. And while we were with them, we were able to get out some old photo albums, and my kids were able to see these generations past of their ancestors, of their family members. And so it was really interesting for us to be looking at these pictures of people who lived a long time before us, and yet there's this strange resemblance. You're looking at pictures of your ancestors, of your great-great-great-grandparents and whatnot, but you notice that you kind of look like them. And especially we realize that Quali, I don't know if you've ever paid attention to Quali's eyebrows. She has these big, bushy, beautiful eyebrows. Those are Baker eyebrows. And we realize that she has her great-great-great-grandfather's eyebrows. So I hope she passes those on to her kids. But I don't know if anyone in your family has ever told you that, oh, you look like, so-and-so from years past. But it's this reality that we carry on a resemblance, an image, a family image, and we reflect that. And we continue to reflect that in our children and in our grandchildren. This image gets passed on. And in a sense, we are created in our ancestors' image. Because we continue to be a reflection of them, even if they're long gone. In Genesis chapter 1, God creates a lot of things. We see God with this creative streak, and in a period of 6 days, Scripture says that He creates all kinds of things, and He creates big things, marvelous things, wonderful things, living things, and good things. God says and recognizes after each subsequent day that what He created is good. But it isn't until the 6th day that God creates something that is unique amongst all the rest of His creation, that is distinguished amongst all the rest of the things that He made by bearing His own image. On the 6th day, something happens that is unique and that is wonderful and that is beautiful, and that is that He creates mankind in His own image. Now, we've all heard that phrase before, that God created man in His image, that God created man in His likeness. But what does that really mean? What are the implications of this reality that you and I were fashioned by the Creator to look like Him, to reflect Him, to reflect His image into the world? What does that mean? I think for a lot of us, that phrase, created in God's image, kind of is one of those Bible phrases, one of those Bible words that we hear over and over again, to the point where it can start to lose maybe some of the awe factor, some of the amazement that we should react with. This reality that we were created in God's image. Has that lost its effect upon you? Has that lost its power? When you read that, do you still wonder in amazement how we can be image bearers of the Creator? And not only that, but the only creatures in creation that have that ability, that distinguished task, that we are the image bearers of God. So read Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 28 with me. And I want you to read this as if it were the very first time you've heard this before. That somebody's telling you this for the very first time. Telling you, in a sense, about yourself. Telling you, in a sense, about your vocation. your job and your identity as a human after God has created all these other things. It says in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, on the sixth day, and God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And so God has just told us, I made you in my image. You are the crown jewel of creation. All these other things are good, and they are wonderful, and they have their place, but you were fashioned in my image. And that's the truth that I want us to focus on this morning. That's the truth that I want you to reflect on. That's the truth that I want you to carry into your heart and just let it sit there and work on you for a little while. This reality that we are image bearers of God. I think that should provoke some amazement in us, some wonder. I think that's a truth that we should marvel at. That we are the sole image bearers of God in this creation that we see in Genesis chapter 1. And so think about creation. Think about what God actually makes. You know, on a really, really dark night on the Oregon coast, if it's clear, which doesn't happen a whole lot, if it's clear and it's really dark, you can look up and you can kind of make out the Milky Way galaxy. Marty has taken pictures of it before, but you can look up and you can see that wonderful tapestry that God has woven in the sky of stars and planets and constellations. And it's vast, it's immense, and it's overwhelming how big and beautiful it is. But it wasn't created in the image of God. You were. You look out at the Pacific Ocean, which we get to look at every single day, and it changes colors, and it's never the same. It's in constant motion, and it goes as far as the eye can see, and it's powerful, and it's inspiring, and it inspires the art that adorns the wall of our church, and adorns our walls at home. It inspires the art of Byron and many other artists because of its beauty and its majesty. And yet, the ocean wasn't created in the image of God. You were. You look at the animals that surround us. I can't say that we're surrounded by things like elephants or tigers, but we have elk and deer and eagles and ospreys and whales. And they're all beautiful and wonderful to look at. And it kind of makes our heart beat faster when we see those animals. And they catch our eyes and they draw our attention. But they weren't created in the image of God. They don't bear the image of God. You do. And so you know where I'm going with this. All of these aspects of creation that we marvel at, that we wonder at, that cause us to feel this amazement and this appreciation for a designer who has this artistic touch. But what about when we think about ourselves? When we think about each other? Are we struck with as much awe and as much marvel at the reality that we were created in God's image? The sole image bearers in this creation? I wanted us to take some time to think about that. All the rest of creation pours forth speech about God and displays His glory. It projects His power. It shows us His majesty. But it does not bear the image of God the way that you and I were created to do. And so we should feel immensely blessed, extremely loved, honored that God would place His own image inside of us. on our makeup, on our genetics, on our DNA, on who we are, we should feel extremely and immensely blessed that is who we are, created in God's image. And so let that sink in this morning, that you bear the image of God. You were created in the image of God to reflect the image of God. That's our vocation. That's our calling. We want to be Christians. We want to be followers of Jesus. And we want to be image bearers of the one who made us. We want to reflect His image and all that entails, His love, His kindness, His mercy, His creativity, His care. We want to reflect that out into the world. After each day in creation, it says that God saw that it was good. But pay attention to verse 31 in Genesis chapter 1. And notice that it's only after there is a creature that bears God's image that He saw that it was very good. It says, God saw everything that He had made, and behold, it was very good. And so creation wasn't very good until there was a creation within creation to reflect God, to reflect His image. And that's who we are. That's who God made us to be. But after we've marveled at this for a little while, after we've looked at this and it's amazed us and it's provoked this wonder within us, we might begin to ask ourselves, well, what does that mean? How does that work? In what way am I a reflection of God? You know, if this is who God is, and He's wonderful, and He's loving, and He's caring, how am I a reflection of that? How does that work? In what way am I a reflection of my Creator? And so we start to think about it. Am I physically, biologically like God? Do we look like God? Is that what it means to be created in His likeness, that we look like Him? Or maybe it's moral? Maybe it's this idea that we have this conscience that can guide us and dictate us, and we know the difference and can discern between right and wrong. Is that how we are like God? Is it just this reality that we have free will, that we can make decisions and we can use logic and reason to make those decisions? Is that what it means to be created in God's image? Well, there's a lot of answers out there, and you can go and you can look them up, and you'll have 1,000 different theologians and learned people tell you this is how you were created in God's image. This is what it means. And so you can look those up, but you can do that on your own time, because I don't want to give you the answers. I don't want to give you a logical explanation of how you bear the image of God, because I think that's beyond explanation. I think that's bigger than we can grasp. And I'm actually thankful that we can't understand that. Because if we lose that amazement, if we lose that awe and that wonder, then how are we going to worship? How are we going to worship God if we can understand how we were created in His image? As we read Genesis, the invitation is to embrace the mystery that's contained within these ancient words. The things in God's Word that we can't grasp and that moves us towards worship. And part of that is being created in His image. It's that we transcend just the physical. That we as humans transcend just the creation, because we bear the image of someone who is spiritual, who is eternal, who is spirit. And so the invitation is to embrace that mystery. Let me illustrate that a little bit. When we were on our trip, we were driving from Virginia to Michigan. And we caught the tail end of this really bad storm in Ohio. And it was a storm system that had moved all throughout the Midwest, and in Nebraska and a couple other places there had been tornadoes. And as we were traveling, I saw this storm system moving and tried to kind of go around it, and we just couldn't avoid it. And so we drove through the tail end of this storm in Ohio, and the clouds were jet black, And once it started raining, it was just pouring, and there was no visibility. The traffic on the freeway slowed down, and it was really pretty nerve-wracking. I've only ever really been truly nervous driving 2 or 3 times, and this was one of those times. And the kids were a little nervous, and it was kind of scary. But as we drove, we kept driving, and suddenly we just broke out from underneath this storm. And we were in the bright blue daylight. And Quali spotted a rainbow. She said, "Oh, look, a rainbow." And it was kind of like this reassuring thing, like, wow, we just passed through this brutal, menacing storm, but God brought us through that. And so they were kind of marveling and oohing and aahing over this rainbow. And after a little while, they started to ask me some questions. Well, how are there so many colors in a rainbow? And I didn't want to give them this scientific explanation about how a rainbow works. I didn't want them to lose the magic of it by me telling them, oh, it's a meteorological phenomenon that happens when, I'm quoting Bill Nye the Science Guy, I'm sure, from my youth. But, it happens when light reflects through water droplets. If I had told them that, they would have just said, oh, okay. If they had started to kind of grasp what happens when there's a rainbow, they would have lost the wonder. And I feel like sometimes when we read Genesis, we come here looking for explanations. We come here looking for answers about the origin of mankind, about the beginning of creation. But there's so much more than just explanation. There's also truth that provokes questions, deep questions, such as who are we and how should we live and who did God make us and create us to be. And so don't let the mystery of this and the beauty of this, don't let it escape you. Don't let it pass you by. Chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, imagine if I had James Earl Jones's voice. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. That's mysterious. That's something that we can't wrap our mind around. But that helps us to worship our Creator. Because He's the one who formed that and who worked in that darkness and in that chaos to bring about order, to bring about creation, to bring about mankind. And so the question that we should ask ourselves isn't, how are we created in God's image, but why? What for? Why are we image bearers? What does that mean to be an image bearer? How should we live if we bear God's image and we're the only creature in all of creation that has that quality, that characteristic? Well, pay attention to some of the language used in Genesis chapter 2. I just want to kind of run through these 5 different verbs kind of quickly, because this is going to set up the next couple of weeks of what we're going to be looking at. But pay attention to the words used here. This is what the image bearers were created to do. This is what mankind was made for. It says, "Let them have dominion." And it goes on to say, "Have dominion over all the earth." And then in verse 28 it says, "Be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth, and subdue it." And so you have 5 different verbs, 5 different actions that the image bearers are supposed to participate in. We are supposed to have dominion over the earth. We are to be fruitful. We are to multiply, replenish the earth, and then subdue it. But I would argue that the way that we view those actions might be a little bit skewed. It might be a little bit tainted. It might be a little bit affected by the world that we live in right now. You see, God is telling mankind to do these things before the arrival of sin, before the the selfishness of sin and transgression. This is dominion before any kind of violence or any kind of oppression had ever entered the world. This is subdue before there was any kind of selfishness or forcing things upon others. This is some kind of holy and righteous dominion. And holy and righteous subdue. Subjugation, I guess, is another way you could say that. And so what does this mean? Is this still relevant to who we are today? How do we live this out now? That word dominion, carries a little bit of baggage with us. When we think about dominion, we think about dominate, and kind of the image that we have mentally is oppression. To dominate someone or to have dominion over someone or something is almost a negative thing. It's almost like we force them to do something, but that's not the picture that we have here. When the image bearers are created to have dominion over all the animals and over the earth, it's dominion in the sense that we are an extension of God's reign, an extension of God's rule. And so what does that rule and that reign look like? Well, we know that God is a father to the fatherless, that He is a defender of the oppressed, that He is a liberator of those who have experienced injustice. To have dominion over the earth isn't to take control of it, but it is to extend God's love and care and mercy to every creature in creation, to every person in creation. And so it's an extension of God's reign, an extension of God's rule. It's not our own dominion. And so you quickly see that the same way that Jesus came into the world to serve and not to be served, that's what it means to have dominion over the earth. It's not to use the earth and the people in the earth for your own purposes, but to be a servant and extend God's loving reign out over all of creation. It also tells us to be fruitful, to be productive. And I know that we usually look at the next couple of things, being fruitful and multiplying and replenishing the earth, in a childbearing sense. And that's one aspect of it. But being productive, being fruitful, in what way? And I think that means that the image bearers are to reflect the qualities of God and reflect them and let them abound in those qualities until some kind of fruit is produced from that. And so you think about the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. That is the fruit of letting God's qualities abound in you as an image bearer. And that's what it means to be fruitful, to multiply and to fill the earth. That really is talking about childbearing there. But what's the purpose of bearing children? We live in a world that has about 7.5 million inhabitants. And there are countries that have tried to slow down the rate of childbirth because people say there's too many humans, there's too many people on our planet, and the planet can't sustain that or whatnot. But God originally said, multiply and fill the earth. What's the idea behind that? Well, if each and every human is an image bearer of God, a mirror, in a sense, of who God is, with the purpose of reflecting God's image and subsequently His love and His care and His mercy into the world, then the more reflections of God that are in the world, the better. The more exposed that the world is to God's image, the better off everybody is. And so think about it like this. You walk into an art gallery. If there's only 2 paintings on the wall, you're not exposed to much beauty. If the art gallery is bare and there's not much in there, then that art gallery has failed to project beauty. But the most successful art galleries are the ones that utilize every single square inch of space on the wall to show beauty through the paintings, through the sculptures, through what's presented. God wanted us to multiply and fill the earth so that His reflection could be everywhere, so that no creature, no man could turn away from the image of God because it was being reflected so frequently. And that's the idea behind multiplying and God telling his image bearers to replenish the earth, to fill the earth. How many of you have filled the walls of your homes with pictures? Pictures of your parents, pictures of your children, pictures of your grandchildren. Why do we do that? Why do we fill our walls with photos of people who we love? Because we want to be reminded of the relationship that we have, of the love that exists between us, the bond that brings us together. And so every time we see that picture, it reminds us about that love that exists. God tells the image bearers to replenish the earth, fill the world with his image, so that humans and mankind and creation would be reminded of the relationship that exists between God and his creation. And so I know that this is a lot, and this is maybe even a little bit overwhelming, because maybe we've never put ourselves in Genesis chapter 1 and realized we are the image bearers, that we are the ones that are to reflect God out into the world. Now sin comes later on, and sin, if we are to be this angled mirror, God reflecting his image out into the world through us, sin comes and smashes that mirror. Have you ever seen a mirror that's been shattered and there's cracks all over it? You can sort of see a reflection in it, but it's all obscured. It doesn't look the way that it's supposed to. That's what sin does. Sin makes it so that it's difficult to reflect God's image. And so we might think, well, sin has made it so that I can't reflect God's image. I don't have that capability. But Jesus came, reflected God's image in a way that no other man had, and Jesus heals us, and he fixes us, and he works on us in our broken state so that once again we can reflect God's image. And the idea is that when Jesus works on us so that we can be image bearers once again, it's so that we can reflect God's image in three ways. And this is what we're going to talk about next week. We reflect God's image back to God in worship. We reflect God's image to one another in fellowship. And then we reflect God's image into creation, into the world, in stewardship. And those are all a part of our vocation that are extremely important and that we want to look at. But know this morning that you are a unique creation fashioned in the image of God to reflect the image of God. Take that truth with you. Dwell on that. Reflect on that. Let that wash over your heart a little bit this week. And let it start to change the way that you see yourself. And change the way that you see other humans. And change the way that you see creation. Knowing that you have a purpose. And that is to show the world what God looks like. And the only way that we can do that is by coming to Jesus. The one who puts us back together. Who fixes us. Who heals us. Who brings us back into an image-bearing place. And so, the invitation this morning is to, if you have not put on Christ in baptism, to allow that transformation to happen, you can do that. If you've fallen short of God's glory and lived in sin that has made it difficult for people to see God's image in you, then come and be met with mercy and grace and forgiveness and be restored to that place that you were once in. But whatever your need is, come forward now as we sing the song of invitation.